The latest from our daily newsletter at podnews.net. The effects of the Apple Podcasts download bug are clearer today after the release of new data from Triton Digital. The buggy app began to be rolled out from May 24. It was fixed on July 31. And Triton's new data allows us to compare May's largely unaffected download numbers with those across July in a number of different territories. In the Netherlands, for example, weekly downloads fell 6.4% in July versus May. In the US, weekly downloads fell 13.3%, and in Australia, released last week, weekly downloads from top 10 publishers fell 6.7%. Spotify's The Ringer has signed a deal with professional wrestling company WWE for an exclusive audio network. The deal includes podcast series and Spotify Greenroom events. Quill Podcasting has published a list of the top female-owned podcast companies, which we link to today in our show notes and our newsletter. And podcast host Captivate now sends podcast credits automatically to Podchaser, using the podcast taxonomy to make it clear who does what. I'm an advisor. Podjobs also supports the podcast taxonomy. And Podnews will return to our normal length on Monday. And in podcast news, X-Ray Vision has been announced from Crooked Media, a show celebrating fandom and fantasy. It premieres on August the 30th. The Podnews podcast, this will sound a bit different on Fridays from here on in, including today. We'll end our hectic week with a minute of Pod Zen with Evo Terra. Something for you to think about over the weekend. It's coming up next. And Podland with me and Sam Sethi interviews Brian Barletta this week and asks what happens when IP addresses go away. Also, enjoy Boostergram Corner and discover that Sethi doesn't know what style of beer a porter is. And that's the latest from our newsletter. For all the links, we're at podnews.net.
For Pod News, I'm Evo Terra with your Minute of Pod Zen. Of all of podcasting's problems, sameness isn't one. Listen to 10 different podcasts and you're likely to hear 10 different approaches to sound. Are those differences from intentional design choices? Compare podcasting to modern-day animation, where you are as likely to see hyper-realistic renderings as you are to see cartoons or computer-driven stop-motion, all rendered on a computer. But if computers are used in all animation today, why doesn't the animation created on those computers look similar? And what does this have to do with podcasting? Well, the answer is simple: style. If you notice a podcast that doesn't sound as good as another, that's likely a function of scarcity of time or money. But I highly doubt animators are making the choice to not spend time to make their animation more realistic. They weren't stuck with the herky-jerky style of motion because they didn't have the budget to smooth it out. No, it's 2021, and animation artists are making choices based on a style they are trying to adopt. Which begs the question: does your podcast have a style? You'll find more thoughts on this topic and other questions every working podcaster should be asking themselves at podcastpontifications.com. I'm Evo Terra. This has been your Minute of Pod Zen.